Happy holidays and Merry Christmas, everyone. I'm Noah Grant, executive producer of the Huskies Warming House Podcast, welcoming you to episode number 42. It's our Christmas special featuring Bill Prout, as well as the best of 2020 for the Huskies Warming House Podcast. In this episode, we will dive into a little bit of holiday fun, a little bit of recapping the men's and women's hockey seasons with Bill Prout, who was gracious enough to spend about 50 minutes and join us in this show. And then in the second half of the show, we will talk about the best of 2020 for the show. That involves our top 5 interviews of the year, as well as some Christmas questions, a lot of fun, and just a lot of really great discussion. As we are aware, of course, this show does run about a little over 2 hours. It will be our last full show, which we will have as one continuous show. So that would be the last time you'll ever probably see a show of this length, as we're going to split up the Center Ice View news and notes, trivia, and our special topic into one show, and then the Healthy Scratch interview segment into another show starting in the beginning of the new year in 2021. So please bear with us. We don't have the logistics of that figured out quite yet, but when we know them, you might just kind of randomly start to see Huskies Warming House podcast episodes come out. For now, I think potentially we are going to be releasing the first half, the meat and potatoes, the Center Ice View news and notes, around probably Sunday afternoon, and then the Healthy Scratch interview segment will probably come out on Tuesday, but we haven't officially figured that out quite yet. Another thing to note about this particular show, this show is going to have no ads or anything like that, so we don't really have any timestamps listed. The two things that are probably most important that most people are here for, at around 13 minutes is when Bill Prout, Nick Maxon, and I will discuss the men's and women's hockey seasons and recap those in a pretty lengthy segment. And then around the 53-minute mark is when the second half of the show starts, which was recorded today on Christmas, and that will dive into the best of 2020 for the Huskies Warming House Podcast. Do not forget as well, trivia does start the upcoming week of January, around January 2nd or 3rd on that Saturday, and it is also going to be the first show of not only the new year, but the new month. So that means that is a double minor giveaway. So 2 Twitter followers will get a Huskies Warming House Podcast t-shirt. With that being said, we hope you enjoy the show, and really happy you joined us in this 2020 edition of our Christmas special.
And welcome back to the Den Huskies Warming House Podcast, fans. It is episode number 42, a different episode this week as we're joined this time by Bill Prout of Center Ice View. We thank you, everybody, as this will be our last show of the year 2020. So we had to bring in one of our special guys that has definitely helped us really get this podcast up and off the floor running. So with that, again, Bill, welcome. And again, great to have you back on. And we talked last time, it was a little bit different circumstances during the summer months, and here we are. St. Cloud and the Twin Cities are just getting annihilated by a blizzard, but nice and warm and comfy, at least here inside the Husky Warming House studios.
Thanks a lot, guys. Great to be with you. And actually, the first time I was on was back in the dark ages of your Huskies Warming House. You weren't on Zoom at the time, and it was all audio. So you've progressed quite a bit in, what did you say, 41 episodes now? 42?
42, yeah. 42. It's I don't know if we're quite out of the dark ages yet in terms of our content, but as far as actually being able to see each other, I think we've been able to do things all right. Nick, I guess we have a couple of housekeeping things to take care of. I guess the first one, maybe we'll get out of the way. We're going to have no ads played in this in this episode this week. So we're just going to jump into trivia and that sort of thing. Of course, with the only real Center Ice View news and notes topic that we have today, Nick, really surrounds the NHL and the start of the season. We're going to table that till next week. We might have another guest coming on next week that should have more to talk about as far as that's concerned. CenterIceView.com, of course, great place to get some information for Huskies hockey. Bill, I don't know if you've ever been to Center Ice View. Have you ever checked out that website? I hear that and Huskies Illustrated are all right. What do you have to say about those?
Yeah, I checked it out once or twice. People probably think I'm nuts, the amount of time I put into it, but I equate it to, a guy going home and going out to the garage and doing a woodworking project. For me, my real job is in the commercial insurance business, which, is deadlines and dealing with some very, serious subjects and dealing with companies and their assets and their people. And so for me, when I go home and I take some free time just to work on CenterIceView.com and Huskies Illustrated, it's relaxing for me. and it allows me to dig into things that I really have a lot of passion about, which is college hockey.
Yeah, I actually, to be honest, I mean, they have two different purposes in terms of Center Ice View and Huskies Illustrated. Huskies Illustrated essentially is a photo gallery on steroids, if you will. That one's my favorite just because, one, I like stealing your photos for our content. We don't steal his photos. He does give us permission, so thank you again for those. But I just like looking at different action shots of hockey and how it's crazy how you can take a game that is so fast and be able to capture a moment within that where somebody is falling over and that sort of thing. So really cool. Definitely go check out both of those websites. And I mean, maybe let's talk about that before we jump into trivia a little bit, I think, Nick. Nick, do you kind of want to fill the listeners in on the role that Bill Prout has played for us getting to episode 42? Because, I mean, we started this in the middle of a pandemic, and the thought that we are sitting here today on Wednesday, December 23rd, talking about episode 42 is just astonishing to me.
Well, small correction, though, because you remember, because we started before the pandemic, and we took a break with the pandemic for a couple of weeks. So, we kind of came back together and we said, at least at the time, we didn't know how long it was going to last. I don't think we ever envisioned that here we sit December 23rd at the time of recording, that we would still be talking about a pandemic, affecting, the world that's around us. But the common goal was, hey, let's keep doing this thing. It's good reps. And then that way, when this thing gets back, we're still fresh on our skill sets, where at least I can talk clearly. I'm still working on that part. Depends on, I guess, how much Gatorade and water I'm consuming in a day. But at the end of it, we wanted to continue to share our passion of not only college hockey in general, but also obviously keep the listeners up to date with I guess Huskies hockey and, is, with the NCHC. And so then it all of a sudden, Bill, and I think this is kind of where we took a giant step, was you reach out to us and you said, hey, I like what you guys are doing. And, I'd like to offer some support. And I think the biggest support we could have gotten, Noah, is, just some contact information with some of the guests that we had, during, arguably the slow times of hockey. So, it's those interviews that really pushed us over to the next level of our podcast. And again, we owe you a great deal of gratitude for being able to help us take that next step into delivering some great insights, some news, and well as to get some of the characters that Huskies fans, whether it's, current players or coaches or alumni, a chance to see some of these people in an element they probably aren't really used to seeing as well.
And I think the thing is the approach that I take with Center Ice View is I call it fan-centric because it's primarily from the viewpoint. I try to look in the shoes of the fan, and what does the fan like to see? What type of information? And so that's the approach that I take. And I think it's worked. I think we built up a pretty good following on our site. But what you two guys are doing right now, and you've had some outstanding guests over the last 40 plus episodes, and you can see that people really appreciate the guests, the content, the great job that you do interviewing. And I think the best thing is that you're so prepared when you talk to these guests, and you ask pertinent questions, but then you allow the guest to speak, which I think is another, very important part of the way you do things.
I appreciate that. I do remember, of course, kind of when we really made that jump was really when like Craig Dahl came on, and then of course Bob Motzko, and then Bob Motzko actually transcended into a kind of a cool one for myself and Don Lucia. But I remember before that Bob Motzko interview, not even being able to sleep that night, thinking, "Holy smokes, we get to talk to Bob Motzko." And then of course, we've had some pretty cool guests, Josh Fenton coming on, and then probably a primo episode, I would say, in like Jack Ashawn and Jimmy Schultz, and like those episodes, it was like, we'll just throw some prep together. We've got this. It's amazing that the transition that has happened. And I kind of want to get your fan perspective on this one, Bill, because it's something that we've talked a little bit about last week and into this week. We ran a poll asking in our show about whether or not listeners preferred to have the episode as one long episode, about 90 to 120 minutes, or if we wanted it split from the segments with Center Ice View, trivia, and kind of our big special topic after interview segment as one show, and then Healthy Scratch interview as a separate show. And the fans overwhelmingly have said to this point that they want the show split in two, which I think we're okay with. We almost kind of record it as such as it is anyway. So I think it is going to be a very beneficial thing as times and dates change. But what is your personal opinion on this one, Bill? I mean, are you excited for the change? Are you excited to see the show split into two? And I guess like from a fan perspective, would it be something where, if we release the meat and potatoes of the show, the news and notes and that sort of thing on a Sunday, would you want the interview to come out the same time? Would you want it to come out on a Tuesday? Would you want it later in the week? I mean, what are your kind of initial thoughts as someone who listens to our show regularly?
Yeah, I pretty much align with the fans. I think that now if it's 90 minute show and I'm in my car, I'd love to have 90 minutes. But if I'm sitting down having a cup of coffee on Sunday morning and I want a quick hit on something, which I normally do. I normally listen to your entire show on Sunday morning and then work on some of the Center Ice View stuff. But personally, I think it's a natural progression to split it up and maybe shorten the segments for those that are sitting at a PC and just want a quick hit of information or want to zero in on, say the interview as opposed to the other stuff. So I think you're moving in the right direction with that.
Sure. And I know that like our discussion too, the biggest challenge for us, and I was having a good conversation with Derek Felksa, whose Twitter handle is @CreaseAndAssist. Hopefully he'll join us soon as well in another episode. But we had kind of talked a little bit about how it's almost dangerous for Nick and I to talk sometimes within Center Ice View News and Notes, because I think we could talk for 3 or 4 hours about hockey just because, especially when the men's and women's team get back into action, we could sit here and dissect the game all day. So it's definitely something that is a revolving door and a challenge for us to try to see how we can piece the show together accordingly. Our last little bit of housekeeping, Nick, as we did mention, is trivia. So we're going to run through that real quick here. It was our last trivia of 2020, and the question did read, in 2017-18, the St. Cloud State women's hockey goaltender Emma Paluzny was the first Husky to achieve multiple All-WCHA honors in the same season. However, both her and defenseman Hannah Bates, who we had on the show last week, have both earned what WCHA women's hockey accolade twice? Do you happen to know, either of you, what the answer to this question is?
I believe I do, but I'm going to defer to Bill Prout on this one.
I'm terrible on trivia. I'm going to defer this. Yep, I'm going to defer this back to Nick.
Is this the all academic honors?
It is. So Brody Falconer was our winner for the 9th time, taking his spot with a little bit of separation on the leaderboard. Both Hannah and Emma are 2-time WCHA All-Academic Team awardees. So once again, we will not have trivia this week, this Saturday. So thanks to all who participated in the year of 2020. We'll be back at it again. I believe it will be, is it December 2nd or 3rd, something like that, or January?
January for those who don't like to go back in time.
Hey, December 3rd is my birthday. I was just too excited. So Brody Falconer has the lead with 9 points, and then Tanner Heath with 6, Fight the Pants with 5 points, and everybody else with 1 point. So we really appreciate everybody who's kind of been grinding on that trivia a little bit. Cool to see that leaderboard expand quite a bit. Nick, I'm going to kick it over to you with whatever you've got planned in store for us next a little bit here.
So I think what we want to do is, again, there's so much NHL news to talk about that I think we do have to split it up for next week. And I think there's more that's going to be coming out too that will kind of tie everything together. So as much as I know that we're really, itching to talk some NHL hockey, it's coming back, which is good, but still plenty of more things to sort of round out. And we'll put the frosting on the cake next week. But I think at first what we really have to do, Noah, is to really kind of bring into the fold of, I guess, where the men's and the hockey's teams are so far this season. It's the halfway point. And for the women's team, I think we need to dissect them first. And then I know with Bill, who, as you mentioned, you watched every single game in the pod, not just with St. Cloud, but, every NCHC team. I kind of go through at least where the Huskies stand as far as, the ranking. Are they deserving of that ranking? And now I guess that we have a pretty good sample size of where they're at. I guess what are the new possible expectations for this team heading into the second half of the season? So, Noah, I'm going to start with you. Let's start with some women's hockey. We've talked about before the last couple of episodes, but for the women, definitely some progress, some improvement being made. And I guess for me personally, I think it's one of those where if you were on that squad, you would have wanted to keep playing. You wouldn't have wanted this break, but they will be back in action here soon. Noah, your first impressions of the first half of the season, and then I guess, where's the bar at and where does this women's team need to go from here?
Sure. So 2-4 is their record, tied for second in the WCHA. They're fourth listed in the WCHA, but they're tied for that second place. They split in a weekend with a 1-0 shutout win to start the season against Mankato, and then dropped the second night. Had a really tough weekend against arguably one of the best teams in the WCHA in Duluth the following weekend, outscored 9-1 in that weekend. I think Duluth, honestly, on a side tangent, is going to be a team to be reckoned with the likes of Minnesota and Wisconsin this year. They have a very, very good group this year. So they came back the following middle of the week, I should say, Bemidji State getting an overtime win and then an overtime loss to cap out the first half of the season. And we threw out some numbers too as far as goal differentials, -9 in the goal differential, -107 in shot differential. I don't know if these are numbers that, you should really be worried about. I think that Duluth series has the bulk of what these would say. But I think this women's group has gotten a lot better and a lot deeper over this course of the first half of the season. And like you mentioned, I think they would like to keep playing. I think Bill would probably say the same thing as well. Bill, I think you had kind of remarked earlier on before the show about how this women's team to you kind of looked maybe a little bit stronger than they did last year.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think they have more talent on the team this year. You take a player like Gentry, who really is a big-time Division I women's player, and she's only played 3 games. Yeah. And so, once you get her positioned into the lineup and get her beginning to get into the flow of the season, I think you're going to see some great things out of her. And, she's a pretty imposing player physically, size, which is definitely a big advantage in women's hockey, particularly, battling through checks because of the way that they call penalties in the league. For her to be able to battle through, through checks is really of a benefit to someone like her. But they do have some scores on the team. They brought back a number of scores from last year. I like Neeland and Kluge and Himmerlova and Gentry. These are quality Division I women's players, and I think it's unfortunate. It's been a dysfunctional season because of the way it started, and I think it's going to be a work in progress, and it'll get better as the season goes along.
I definitely would agree with that, Nick. Before I kick it over to you, I think that, of course, we had Emma Paluzny on last episode as well, and I think their goaltending situation, especially with the addition of Sonia Hola, and then, of course, Carly Reese will enter her senior season next year. I think their goaltending I hesitate to call them problems because they're not problems at all. Their goaltending is going to be very, very strong in the future. So, I think when you have the ability to work from the back end up, and like we've talked about how defensively they're all right, they just weren't scoring enough. And when you have those additions like Clara Himlerova, Taylor Lind, Olivia Savard, some of these younger players, Emma Gentry, especially, who was WCHA Rookie of the Week a week and a half ago, those are very, very important additions to this group that's looking to make some noise in the WCHA. And I think they're just itching to get ready for the second half of the season. And it's really good to see as well. We'll talk about this on the men's side too. St. Cloud in the past couple of years bringing in some really good rookie players that are starting to make an impact very, very quickly on both the men's and women's squads.
100%. And, I know Bill talks about the impact of Emma Gentry. This team, if anything, if you want to call it their goaltending, it's more the fact that they're just defending too much, right? They just get worn down. So your shot differential stat that you talk about is more of an indictment that this team just spends way too much time in their own zone. Now, a couple of things that have gotten better with this squad. Overall, they are a team that's playing faster, right? I think that was one thing that we saw from last season that, they were very slow, but it almost seemed like they were just worn out because, again, last season we saw the same issue where a lot of time defensively, and then it was almost get the puck to the red line, dump it, and get a line change, and you were dead tired already. So when you have players like Emma Gentry, Olivia Savard, Yania Newland, and Clara Himlerova that can give you sustained offensive forechecking pressure and actually put the opposing team on their heels a little bit and actually try to control a little bit, you will eventually start to have these things even out a little bit. You'll start to get the shots up. Eventually your goal differential improves. So, a player like Emma Gentry, who, like Bill said, imposing, can fight through checks, all that is more just based around puck possession and having chances on the stick, right? So when you're starting to turn the tables toward the offensive side, that gives Emma Paluzny and a great tandem of goalie talent there a little bit of a rest too, right? Because unfortunately for Paluzzi, you would love to see her, break the shot record as just for saves, but you also don't at the same time, you don't want her to have to make 35, 40 saves a night. So it's going to get there. I do agree with Bill. It's going to be a work in progress. But and again, the big question is how steep is the ladder going to be for them? Are they going to improve quite a bit, or is it going to be more of a slow burn kind of a deal? But, as we know in hockey, sometimes it's not how high you peak, but when you peak too. So if this team continues to get better every game, again, in the WCHA, it's such a competitive conference. But again, Huskies get better. You never know. You might be able to beat a team that maybe up there, Duluth, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Now you're starting to talk about not only is this team much better, but now is this team competing for a top spot in the conference.
Yeah, and I think that this group played their best games of the year last year against those higher up teams, your Ohio States, your Wisconsins, your Minnesota. So if they can bring that effort, especially that I think we've seen more of in this season in the second half now, this is a team that's on the rise and really excited to see where they end up. And don't forget, next season, the addition of St. Thomas as that eighth team will put another wrench into things as well. Nick, moving over to the NCHC and the pod that just finished up on the men's side going 6-3 overall. They do have a game in hand on the two teams that they do trail as they're third in the NCHC, trailing Omaha and the University of North Dakota by 2 points and 4 points respectively. So this group a little more in the plus column as far as goal differential, +5 in the goal differential, +29 in the shot differential for this group. VT Miettinen, one of the leading scorers as a freshman, as well as Nick Perbix on the back end. Very, very rare that you see a defenseman that is the leading scoring on a team. Although Jack Ashawn was pretty good, I would have to say. But really happy to see Sam Henches start to get on the board. I think Nolan Walker has progressed again this year, as we had talked about as well. But I really like to get Bill's thoughts on the NCHC pod in general, and then where he thinks the Huskies stand. I think as much as we want to believe that this St. Cloud group was the up-and-coming team, it's kind of really hard to discount this Omaha group that has kind of really taken off, not only standings-wise, but I think they were a good group even before we saw them rocket up to second place to finish the pod. But, Bill, I mean, what are your impressions of the Huskies? Have they gotten better this year? Are they going to maintain that third spot or better in the NCHC? And what did you like and not like from the group?
Well, I think the result was much better than what I expected, to be honest with you. I think the coaching staff is very happy with the team after 9 games. They feel that they're farther ahead now than they were last year. Last year they were a little more one-dimensional and they had to rely on, a few players to define their roles, like the Palings, to, probably have too much ice time, but they were forced to do that. This year, if you recall the last game that they played, the amount of time that the quote-unquote fourth line was on the ice, it just shows you that they have a lot of balance on the team and they have confidence in their 1 through 4 lines, although, they don't consider it their fourth line. But so there's a lot more balance. But I thought the key is going into the season, they needed to get a big year out of Nick Perbix. And, he has really elevated his play this year. The Tampa Bay Lightning are starting to look like geniuses for projections on him, because he is starting to look like an NHL player. His skating is very smooth, and for a tall, lean guy, he's got extremely good hands. And so that's one of the keys. The other key was that the junior forwards of Miller, Henches, and Walker, and those are the guys now as upperclassmen that they really needed to elevate their game, and I think they've done it. Henches is the scorer. Although he went for about a year without a goal. I mean, we're going back to last season, but he has picked things up as the pod went on. Walker and Miller, will have to see if the scoring improves out of those two guys. But again, Miller, you look at his play on the penalty kill and the amount of chances he gets shorthanded, and just the way that he plays. He's a power forward. He's very valuable, and I think Walker's been a really good surprise this year. He's not scoring as much as he'd like to be scoring, or as much as I thought that he might be scoring at this time during the year. But we'll have to wait and see on him. But he's a good skater. He's playing aggressive. They're putting him in key positions out there. He's on the power play. He's become a very valuable player for them. The addition of the two graduates transfers, Cockrell and Donahue, I mean, are absolutely tremendous for this team. As a matter of fact, when I put together my all NCHC pod team today, which I put on the blog, I've got Donahue on the third team. Now, a lot of people might disagree with that, but if you look at it, he's really taking care of the fort when Nick Perbix is skating up ice and he's putting on some of his offensive ability. Donahue is staying back and holding down the fort. You look at the amount of ice time that he had in the pod, and you look at how well he played defensively, and he was +6 in the pod. And so, you kind of look at him as being an offensive guy, a mobile defenseman, but he actually played very well defensively in the pod and played well against, I believe he was +5 against UND, Omaha, and Denver. And so he was playing very well in the big games. Of course, Miettinen is outstanding. Definitely, the all-rookie pod team with Savoy and Gaber. And all three of these guys have an NHL wrist shot. And I think that's the thing that differentiates them from the other forwards in the pod. That's why they stood out so much, is that you put them in position anywhere in the shooting area, and a goalie is going to have to be afraid because they can beat you at just about any time. So I like the balance on the team. Defensively, they're not flashy, but talking to some coaches in the league, they're very impressed with the Huskies defense from the standpoint of their physical size and their strength. They're not as mobile as some other defensive corps, but I think they're a pretty solid group, and they have enough quality defensemen there to play with. Probably more than what they really need to play with right now. They've got guys on the bench that probably could be playing.
It's kind of interesting too, when we talked about in kind of our preview of the season, we talked about how this forward group was not a big group. They're a speed and skill type group. They're not going to grind it out in the corners. And that defensive core, like you mentioned, has really been able to take care of their own zone. And to take care of your own zone, you often got to kind of take a little bit of punishment as a defenseman. So I think that the Huskies have been able to do that. A couple of questions for you regarding some things that our fans have kind of touched out a little bit too. And one of those I want to go along with the defensive side is the goaltending situation, specifically David Rennick. And I think David Rennick, especially last year, but even this year, I know he gave up a couple of early goals in some games in the pod. There's been kind of a knock on him as far as, is he a goaltender that really has taken that next step? Or is this all we're going to get from David Rennick? I mean, do you like David Rennick's play? Do you think he's been playing well? Or do you kind of agree with the fans that you feel like you should maybe be seeing a save or two more from Rennick on the back end?
Well, I like to play David Rennick, although I think, the comment that I would have is consistency and getting a big game out of him, game in and game out. You look at some of the younger goaltenders that were in the pod, like Bossy for Colorado College, and of course Pearson for Miami. And these are guys that came in, and particularly Pearson. I mean, his goals against and his save percentage are crazy. I think he played half of the games of the pod, but his save percentage was 96%. David went into that last game with a save percentage under 90% and the goals against above 3, and that's not going to cut it. And I think from that standpoint, that's why you saw more minutes from Castor and you saw more minutes from Lamoureux, because I think they're still looking for the goaltender that's really going to take charge. They want Rennick to take charge. He has the ability. He's an NHL draft choice. But I think it's a consistency factor. And, one of the telling goals was the game against North Dakota when I believe it was Colin Adams came in from the outside and went around Spencer Meyer and he roofed it above David's shoulder. Now, I'm not a goaltending coach. That concerns me a little bit because I think if David's just standing up and he's blocking the corner of the net, so I think sometimes there might be some structural things that he's doing that are hurting him a little bit. I'm certainly not giving up on David Rennick. I think he's a quality goaltender. We just need to get a big game out of him to win those games that, might go either way.
Sure. And then the other guy that I kind of wanted to ask about too, and this is, he's had no negative talk about him, but I think he's been more of a surprise and a guy that's been a little bit under the radar, a guy that we had on a couple episodes back, and that is Kevin Fitzgerald. I think Kevin Fitzgerald goes really under highlighted, if you will. Was he, he's my standout guy, I should say, for the Huskies. Besides VT Miettinen, who is your quote unquote standout or underrated guy? I believe it probably maybe is Seamus Donahue for you, but is there another player that really kind of surprised you or really made the jump that you were hoping for?
I've always been, I talked a little bit about Nolan Walker, and I am a fan of Nolan Walker. I just think that he has, all the characteristics of being a great player, and he's only a junior, and it's only after 9 games in his junior year. And I think that, for Nolan is probably just confidence. He came in and he made the all-rookie team as a freshman, and then he had that sophomore slump. And, maybe got down on himself a little bit or lost a little bit of confidence. But, that's one guy that I think could really improve things for this team if he starts scoring. And, he's had an ability in junior hockey to be a top scorer. I agree with you on Kevin Fitzgerald. Here's a guy that, came out of the NHL and he was more of a later commit for the Huskies. And he's come in and he's been, just an incredibly efficient and productive player for the Huskies. He's one of those players that he can perform offensively, but he also is good defensively. And he's a guy that, he can grind as well. So you pretty much get the whole picture out of him.
Yeah, and a centerman as well to boot. I also like how you mentioned earlier about Micah Miller. There's a guy that we've touched on a little bit too, where I feel like Micah, if he can just find a way to pot a couple of those chances, because he's in all the right places, it seems, just doesn't have that scoring touch right now. I think with him and Nolan Walker finding a little bit more production, like you mentioned, this group is definitely going to take off. Let's picture around the rest of the NCHC though, because like Nick had mentioned, you got a chance to take in probably about 90% or better of the games. We touched a little bit on Omaha. We knew North Dakota was going to be a pretty good team. Denver really didn't have the showing that they were looking for. And then, of course, you have the bottom teams, or quote-unquote bottom teams. Anything can happen in the NCHC in Colorado, Miami, and Western Michigan. And then, of course, Duluth in there as well. Let's not forget how good they are, tied with us right now. I know that, again, going back to the fans' perspective, there's some frustration, especially going back to game number 8 in the pod. That really tough start, a 3-1 deficit, and they claw their way back. The Huskies do against Colorado College, which was looked at as a lesser team, if you will, getting an overtime win by a score of 4-3. I mean, what would you say to that perspective about fans thinking that, a game against any NCHC foe would be an easy win, if you will? And then number 2, who are your groups to watch out for in the NCHC? And then who are the teams that you thought were going to have a better showing that really have struggled?
To be honest with you, and this sounds a little crazy, but I do like Western Michigan. And, if they could get there, unfortunately, their goaltender got injured and they took a heavy hit last year. In departures with players. But you're starting to see that team, you can see them improve during the pod, and they're really formidable because of the style of play. I mean, they are really a distinctive style of play. Probably, Miami right now is probably similar to that, but Miami can't put up the offense like Western Michigan does with Frank and Passel and Washke and, some of their other guys. So it probably sounds a little crazy, but for a team that only won 2 games, I thought that they came a long way during the pod. And if they can get some goaltending, I think they're going to be difficult to contend with. And the thing is that our schedule, the schedule of the Huskies is overloaded with Western Michigan, the second half of the schedules. That's going to be interesting to see how those teams match up. And, Western they won 1 game and they were tough out in the very first game of the pod. Naturally, North Dakota with their 12 NHL draft choices, they're formidable. What can you say? I mean, they're skilled. They get Clevin and Sanderson back, and, they're going to be extremely formidable. I don't know for sure if I would say that they've got the best goaltending in the league. I think that there's some susceptibility there. as far as the top three goaltenders in the NCHC pod, it was Seville by far. He was, the best in every statistical category of goalies that played over 90% of the games. Clearly, he was the best goaltender in the pod. And then I thought, Ludwig Persson, he played 5 games, but, 96 save percentage and 1.6 goals against. He was outstanding every single game that he came in. And then I would probably, the next goaltenders I'd put on the list would be Shield and Fanti from Duluth. And I think those two are kind of a toss-up. But Duluth, a great team. Denver's an enigma. And, we understand that they're missing Bobby Brink because of the World Junior stuff. But, I think it's more to it than that. Losing Ian Mitchell was a big hit back in the blue line. And at the forward position, losing Emilio Peterson, that was a big hit for Cole Gutman because those two played together and they really had a lot of chemistry. And so it's going to be interesting. We were all waiting for Denver to snap out of it, and they never really did. And they do have some, high quality players on the team. Savoy is unbelievable, just a scary player. And but it's going to be interesting to see, where they finish up the second half of the year. They could end up finishing in the middle of the pack.
I like to agree with you, Bill, on that, because with Denver, losing one player, and granted, Bobby Brink is, arguably one of their better forwards on that roster, but he doesn't solve your team's issues by any means. Denver, to me, was a team that just seemed to be almost a step behind on a lot of things. And as you mentioned, Ian Mitchell going to Chicago, and again, Emilio Peterson, not only again, you talk about Cole Gutman, but their power play. Emilio Peterson was their go-to guy on that right side because of just how good. You talk about a guy with an NHL wrist shot, Emilio Peterson, my goodness. One of the quickest releases I've seen in person, went through the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. And so you talk about special teams in an even sense. Emilio Peterson actually hurts them in a couple different ways. But again, like you mentioned, you can't count Denver out of it. I think they have some things to solve offensively. I think they have some things to solve defensively. They have a really good coach in David Carl. That's going to be, leading them through. And I think, it was a natural regression for them. And I 100% agree with you in Western Michigan. If this team has goaltending, that team is scary. Again, you can, Andy Murray is one heck of a hockey coach. They are always in your face. And at the end of the day, I don't think we're having the same conversation if Brandon Busey doesn't get injured. I think that, we probably have a 5-team split on top of the NCHC conference with Western Michigan. But there's a team, Noah, that we haven't talked about enough, and that's Omaha. A team that honestly, just when you look at the roster, nothing really flashy, but this team is bought in to everything Mike Gamenei wants them to do. They play fast, they play physical, they suffocate you, and more importantly, defensively, they just keep you to the outside. The Huskies could not really get anything on the interior. They couldn't really do anything as far as sustained offensive pressure. On the rush, they had people back when the Huskies were coming up them off the ice. They just are a win-by-committee type team. And that's a team in college hockey is almost the most scary team to go up against, right? Because when you have teams like North Dakota or teams like UMD, when you have some skilled players and you can shorten the bench and you can get things done, Omaha, you can roll 4 lines and they can come at you and they can be scary no matter who you throw out there. So to me, Omaha deserves all the credit in the world. They are that good. They don't have, the name that sticks out, the name recognition, but man, that team is playing like a 20-man unit every single night, and they're going to be a formidable opponent for the second half of the season as well.
They're kind of a group that makes me think of the St. Louis Blues of 2019 a little bit when they went on their cup run. Just a team that not only will they beat you with skill, but they're a very heavy, very physical team to deal with. And when you add that physicality, that's a game changer for me. We are running kind of lengthy on time here, Nick, so I only have one more question before Bill. And again, for our listeners, stick around. We're going to be doing our best of the year from the the Huskies Warming House podcast, checking out some of the best interview answers and other things that we thought were interesting from the year. Bill, let's transition away from hockey right now. I believe you're at home right now. We're recording this on Wednesday, but when it comes out on Friday and Saturday, what do you have any big Christmas weekend plans? If it wasn't COVID, what would you normally be doing for Christmas? I mean, I guess maybe you don't strike me as a live it up party type of guy, but maybe I could be wrong.
Well, you didn't know me in my younger years. But, actually, I'm just going to be a homebody for Christmas. Went out and bought a honey baked ham, and we're going to, fix that up with all the fixings and probably open up a bottle of champagne. And one thing you guys probably don't know about me is I'm a little bit of a wine connoisseur, and I've got a fairly extensive wine cellar. So, that's usually fun on the holidays. But normally this time of the year, I am out in Massachusetts visiting relatives, and usually out on an outside rink skating with the nephews and doing that sort of thing. But, obviously this year travel plans are out, and so I'll be a homebody this year.
Nick, it never fails. Imagine that. My last question always is a follow-up question, and I've got two of them here. Number one, Bill, how good are you on the ice rink? Really, is Brett Larson going to give you a phone call? And number two, we had Dave Shayak on a couple weeks ago, speaking of coaches, and he's a bit of a wine guy himself. Are you a red wine guy, a white wine guy? What's your kind of go-to wine, or what's in the, if Nick and I are coming over to hang out at the Prout household, what's the wine that you're pulling out of the cellar for us to sample?
To be honest with you, I wouldn't go with a California Cab, because for some people that's a little too bold. Probably what I would do is I'd pull out a nice bottle of Bordeaux, a blend, a Merlot Cab blend, something that's, smooth, aged a little bit, and introduce you to red wine. I am a red wine guy, but on a nice hot day in the summer, I do like to drink some Chardonnay or a Sauvignon Blanc. But I would, if I had you over as a guest, I would be feeding you some red wine.
I think that's a good description, and Nick, smooth yet aged. I think that's a good description.
Most people know this about me, but Bill, I'm actually quite the wine snob myself. I've been, before, I guess, in my current dealings outside of the hockey world, I spent a lot of time in restaurants, actually. And one of my jobs was actually a bar manager. And this restaurant I was at, they had the wine list that was over 82 different bottles. So you talk about, Bordeaux from France, or, a good solid California red Cabernet. Those are kind of up my alley. And I think, for Chardonnays, if you really want a Minnesota twist, Bill, just because you might know this, I know probably the winery Murphy Good, right?
Yes.
Okay. So they have this white wine, and I believe it's a kind of a affliction of a Chardonnay. It's called Minnesota Cuvée. And it's kind of interesting because, these winemakers, first of all, they are Minnesota residents, even though the winery is based in California. The tip of the wine bottle is a purple wrapping, purposely to be Vikings fans. But the wine itself is actually kind of fun because they actually age their Chardonnay in Minnesota oak. So that's more of this smoky campfire type flavor. Yes. It's really, really good. And I don't know, just from a Minnesota perspective, I don't know, when you sip that wine, it seems more Midwest than it does maybe, say, Southeast Pacific coast. But wine, yes, definitely like that. But no, again, let's get away from wine a little bit. I cut you off a little bit there. Let's go into some of the more, I guess, Christmassy things, because I know Bill talked about that. For me, usually my dad's side is he's one of 7 kids. So it's usually 30 people over at his parents' house, so my grandparents' house. And they're very, very close to kind of a very popular area here in Minnesota. They're basically a block south of Bloomington Ice Garden there in West Bloomington. It's a rink that I spent a lot of my younger years growing and developing my game. So it's usually over there. And then they are right next to a city park. So it was usually a family hockey game that was played on that ice rink. Unfortunately, with the blizzard-like conditions, and I don't really think a Twin Cities rink has ever been flooded yet. I don't think we're going to be on the ice at all, but maybe some mini sticks. I got some nephews and nieces that are getting a little bit older, and you need something to kind of expel their energy from. So maybe we might do some stuff in the basement this year with a much smaller family.
They're probably about your height by now, I'd say, right?
there's not much that can go over that. So yeah, that sounds about right. I'm still waiting for the surgery to insert the phone books on my feet, but we'll work from that. So, what about you? Actually, since the guy who's pretty much, if you were to just to kind of give a part of North Dakota to Canada, you're basically a Canadian resident. So what does Noah Grant do on his holidays? And besides, I don't even know what you do anymore, just because you often train your Alexa to make fun of me. You're basically, you're moving too, so you got that coming up. And then number 3, I mean, you're just trying to show me up in some MLB The Show and some other things. So I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of disappointed. I shouldn't say disappointed, but if any of you are hardcore gamers, the Cyberpunk release has been less than stellar to the gaming world. So I've been kind of disappointed by that. But no, I mean, there's only 3 of us up here. So normally we just kind of hang out. We have had waffles and eggs for a Christmas dinner before. Again, applicable to Thanksgiving. It's applicable to Christmas too. So we had biscuits and gravy last night of all things too. So I think it's going to be steaks for us though. Ribeyes, medium rare, or it's not a steak. Is going to be on our plates for holiday Christmas. Normally I would, in my younger years, I'd be skating at the rink and that sort of thing, or out on the pond. Of course, we have a pond and a lake next to where I live, right down the hill here. So normally I'd be skating, but we're just like Bill, we're going to be homebodies. We're going to have some white wine, not red wine. Probably just a Riesling, something simple. We don't have many go-tos, I think, for North Dakota. We're lucky if we get wine at all. So, we're just going to hang out and not really do anything very, very interesting, Nick. Isn't that prototypical North Dakota? Very, very, very boring. Although I will say, can I put this out here? He called me a coward, so I'm going to put this out here. Go Huskies, woo. Not all people from North Dakota are bad. All right, man. We're all right. Okay. We might not have our wits and political agendas in order, but we're all right over here. All right. So I just got to say we're okay. But yeah, no, we're just hanging out. I mean, Bill, I see you perking up in your seat. Do you have an opinion on North Dakota people? I mean, how do you feel about us?
No, what I was going to say is I was going to ask you how far Botno is from Minot.
Botno from Minot is about an hour and 15 minutes. Although if you drive like my mom, it's about less than an hour. It's funny because if I drive from my home here to St. Cloud, it is 7 hours. But if I drive from Minot to St. Cloud, it is still 7 hours. The distance actually doesn't change because of the diagonal way that Botno and Minot are. So I'm still half a day's jog from going to see any game at the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. But as we sit right now, I am about a 5-minute walk south of the Canadian border. So I'm pretty darn close to about 10 minutes from the International Peace Gardens. So about an hour south of where Dave Shayak is from in Brandon, Manitoba.
And how far from Drayton?
Drayton, not familiar. Is there anything that's close to there that is bigger that I would recognize? That's the thing with North Dakota is you can name a small place like Minto, and if you don't know exactly where Minto is, if you're not one of 5 people that are in Minto, is there any town?
You're getting very close to the border, and it is the catfish capital of North Dakota.
Is it west or east of Minot?
I believe it would be east of Minot.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe it's up by like Antler and stuff like that. That's the thing. When you start naming towns in North Dakota, if you don't know the 5 main ones, you're pretty much out of luck. That's the thing with North Dakota. It's funny. I was on a trip once. Speaking of North Dakota, I was on a trip to Florida, and the guy in Miami asked me, he goes, "Where are you from?" I said, "Oh, I'm from North Dakota." He says, "Oh, do you guys have windows in your houses, or do you just have the dirt hills without the windows?" And I'm like, well, we actually do have like air conditioning and lights and running water in our place. So North Dakota is not as bad as they make it out to be. But as I have to clarify many times in this show, I am the farthest thing from a University of North Dakota Fighting Hawks fan as you can possibly be. So I am not a Fighting Hawks fan. Let's make that clear right now. You know what? I got to say this, Nick, too. And I know we're running way over time here, but that's okay. It's the holidays. I have to say, I only spent a year and change at St. Cloud State University. And the impression, I grew up a Gophers fan. And like when I was watching games, in the pod, how like when you're a kid and you grow up and, your team scores on TV and you jump up and, you give a clap or whatever, you give a fist bump and you kind of cheer and like audibly make some visible reaction, right? I was doing that throughout the entire pod. And I know people say, well, yeah, you cover the Huskies, but it's like, I've really become really kind of endeared a little bit to Husky culture and that sort of thing. And I kind of have Bill to thank for that, because I remember, and I don't know if you do, Bill, my first ever official event that I covered for the Huskies, for the University Chronicle, was actually the puck drop breakfast last year. And you were one of the first people that I actually ran into, because I met you, and you were the one who introduced me to who did you introduce me first? I'm trying to think. Who did the guy just? Wow. No, I got it. Jim Erickson and Dave Reichel. That's who he introduced me to. And then of course I met Brett Larson, that sort of thing. Do you remember that? Do you remember that moment and kind of seeing this young, I don't know, scared kid or whatever, not knowing exactly what he was doing and thinking that, wow, I'd be on his show as a podcast in episode number 42. I mean, am I the only one who thinks it's surreal? Because I think everything is surreal when it's all said and done, but.
You just seem like a very social guy and very friendly, and I loved your enthusiasm about St. Cloud State hockey. And anybody that's interested in talking SCSU Huskies hockey is good by me.
Sure. Once again, Nick, I'll hand it off to you. But Bill, from myself and from Nick and from everyone who listens to the Huskies Warming House podcast, through all the things not only that we've talked about on screen, but some things that we've had off the screen that you've been able to support us as well with. We truly do thank you, because our ability to be able to sit here around Christmas time and do this doesn't happen without the guy that's sitting underneath Nick and I on your screen if you're watching the YouTube edition, or who has been talking with us in the audio version. I mean, we truly and truly thank you for being a part of this. So Nick, I guess I'll kick it over to you and whatever you want to do. So.
Wow, he gives me that freedom. That's interesting. I think it's first. I think I have to piggyback off Noah again. Again, Bill, we can't thank you enough for the contributions that you've had with our podcast, our listeners, and again to be able to chance to it's December 23rd. There's a blizzard outside, and yet the thing that I look forward to most when I get off of work or a class is to be able to talk hockey, and for you to come in and to provide us with some of the ability to have some of the guests that we've had on to really, just take us to the level that we, as envisioned from our standpoint, but also what I think is going to be of value to the folks who watch/listen. We wouldn't be here without you. So again, from us here again at the Huskies Warming House Podcast, couldn't thank you enough for everything you do and have contributed to us. So again, much gratitude to you and to Centerized View. Noah, just because, you had an old guy moment there. I'm having an old guy moment. Was there anything that we're missing on this episode, or?
I don't think we are. If you're just made it this far and haven't shut us off quite yet, the reason we have so many things to think about is this is our first show we've ever done, actually, even before the pandemic, that we had zero structure to. So we're doing something a little bit different. But don't forget, before you tune into our next segment, we do have, like we mentioned, next week or probably the week after is when we will start to split up the show and kind of figure out the logistics for that. So please bear with us if you start to see random Huskies Warming House podcast episodes just flying on to your mobile devices, or if you're Bill Prout on your BlackBerry. So it's just kind of hang in there with us, and we're very happy that you chose to hang out with us in this holiday season. Nick, I don't think we are missing anything. So once again, Bill, do you have any parting words before we bid you adieu?
No, I just want to wish you guys happy holidays and best wishes for the new year. And thanks for the great job that you're doing on this podcast. It's just very entertaining. I love listening to it I listen to it on Sunday mornings and really enjoy it. Thanks a lot. And it was a pleasure to be on with you guys again. And again, happy holidays.
Definitely going to have to talk with you again, Bill. And hashtag Go Huskies Woo. That'll do it for our first half of the segment. Stay tuned as we jump in right now to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Best of 2020. Merry Christmas, everyone, from the Huskies Warming House Podcast. It is Friday, December 25th. Nick's, he's laying in bed, I think. I just had I just had a cup of Joe, hanging out. It is legitimately Christmas. We are not pulling your chain. We are hanging out on Christmas Day, ready to bring you the best of the 2020 year from the Huskies Warming House Podcast. Some of our favorite interviews, guests that kind of stood out to us, and some kind of Christmas things and other things that we're thankful for or that we've seen that kind of piqued our interest, if you will, within our lifetimes. Of course, Nick's lifetime, considerably longer than mine, Nick. I had to throw one of those in there at least. Nick, how are you doing on this Christmas morning? I know there's only 3 of us in my household. There's probably about 300 in yours from what it sounds like.
Not that many. There will be about 10 of us later here today celebrating, but that's going to be a little bit later this afternoon. So there's a lot of food prep right now because we're going to be doing some snacks and watching some Vikings football. Unfortunately, they're probably going to get killed by the New Orleans Saints today. And well, I kind of hope they do, honestly, because they're not going to go anywhere. They're going to miss the playoffs and, well, tank for a mid-round pick, I guess. So
the Vikings haven't ever had any bad run-ins with the Saints before, have they? I mean,
no, I don't think so. No history there at all. So,
oh my goodness. So to give people a little bit of perspective, again, we did mention it at the tail end of the previous episode, but we are going to remind you probably a couple times just so that you're aware. Once this show is over next week, we are going to be splitting the show up and kind of figuring out the logistics of that. So again, bear with us as we kind of split up our guests and the rest of our show. But speaking of guests, Nick, let's jump into our first interview. We're going to do our top 5 interviews of 2020. We're going to start with number 5, and that's a story from former assistant coach of the men's hockey team, Mike Gibbons, who's now with Bemidji State University. Mike was a blast to have on, and I kind of told us a funny story about recruiting and traveling through some caribou-infested country, if you will. So without further ado, Mike Gibbons.
Funny recruiting stories. How much time do you have? I mean, there's. I think every recruiter has so many hilarious stories about recruiting, and I go back to one of the funnier ones is actually I remember being with the Austin Mavericks, and there was a Yale recruiter that tried to recruit me, and after a game he was all excited and he kind of stopped me before I got to the locker room. And he goes, "Give me," he goes, "Mike," he goes, "you're just the kind of player we needed, Yale." He goes, "Let's meet for lunch the next morning." And I said, "Gosh, that's exciting." And so we met, and at this restaurant, and he didn't seem quite as excited, And he's like, "Mike," he goes, "at Yale," he goes, "you need pretty good grades, and I just met with your principal, and quite frankly, Coach, or Mike," he goes, "we couldn't get you into Yale with our crowbar," So I give that guy credit because, he still met with me, even though I couldn't get into Yale, but I did get into Bemidji State, which is a great move. But on the recruiting trail for St. Cloud State, one of the kind of the more interesting things for me was going overseas, and I started, kind of going to Sweden first before I really got into the Finns in Finland, because at the time Sweden had a better hockey program. It was, about that time Finland just started to take off, and I kind of go back and forth between Finland and Sweden. And I remember making that drive from Sweden over to Finland, and I think you get about 30 miles from the Arctic Circle as you travel over the Finnish Sea, or whatever the ocean is between Sweden and Finland. And I remember the first time I saw a caribou on the road, and I had to stop the car and look at it. It's like, and just looking at me was kind of funny. And I drive along a little bit, and all of a sudden I'd see 2 or 3 caribou, and that was amazing for me, those big antlers, and I'd even get out of the car and look at them and drive around a little bit. All of a sudden there was like hundreds and thousands in the road, and I'm honking my horn and said, get off the road, you crazy animal. So that was kind of funny. But I remember traveling, I was in northern Sweden, and I had to get to Stockholm, and I had to literally drive through the night to get there to watch Oliver Lauritsen play in downtown Sweden, or Stockholm. And I remember they had the moose warning signs, and I'm like, yeah, whatever. You always see, in Minnesota, you see a deer crossing sign. You're like, yeah, right. And I said, the world's smallest rental car looked like a tin can. And I had to get to Stockholm, so I just get there. And I started out going about 50 miles an hour, looking all over for moose, and if this tin can hit a moose, we'd be in trouble. And I said, finally, there's no moose, and they'd see the signs. And I said, screw it. I'm just going to get there. So I accelerated about 80, 85 miles an hour. And just as I started going, I literally, there is the head of a moose with antlers that missed me by about literally inches on my left. And it was the most afraid I've ever, my heart just started beating. And I'm going, this is, if I would hit that guy, I guess they die all the time on that interstate between northern Sweden and Stockholm. And I said, wow, this is crazy. So I slowed back down. I'd learned my lesson. And, but again, I kind of had to get there, and I got impatient. I picked her back up again. I said, I got the high beams on, and I guess moose don't have that stuff in their eyes where you can see them, is what I was told later. So I had to get there, and I started to pick it up again. But I'm looking to my left, looking for that moose, and sure enough, all of a sudden on my right side was a moose's rear end. And I was looking to the left for the moose. This guy was on the other side. So that was probably the second most afraid I've ever been in my life, because I missed him by just a couple inches. But I ended up getting to watch Oliver Lauritsen, and I think he was our first European that we ever got. So it was he was an interesting player and a great kid. And he was such an impressive person that he added so much to the locker room that it's like we could always use another one like him in our locker rooms. He kind of motivated us to open up the European expansion for St. Cloud State.
Kind of funny. I remember the first time I met you. I think it was actually after a practice. You guys were getting ready to eat some food, and I was getting ready for some media thing. And you were like, "Yeah, it's nice to have good food again. I'm sick of eating gas station burgers, on the road recruiting." And I'm like, "Gosh, I would love to eat gas station burgers on the road recruiting one hockey team." But kind of cool, interesting story. Yeah. Nick, always a pleasure to sit down with Mike. Hopefully going to have him on again, maybe after he's officially done with his career. I know we touched on that a little bit. Kind of funny to hear him talk about his travels and that sort of thing. Speaking of our guests, though, Nick, before we jump to number 4, I kind of am curious. I know that we have a lot of, obviously, guests on the show. We've had a guest in episode 3 and 4, and then from episode 12 onward, we've had someone on every week, starting with Brett Larson in episode number 12. But is there a particular guest, or I guess a trio of guests, if you will, and I hesitate to use the word favorites because we love all of our guests. We love people that come on, but there are just some people that naturally we strike up a conversation with, or it just seems very fluid and very easy for us to get along with that person. That's just human nature. Do you have 3 quote unquote favorite guests, if you will, that kind of stuck out to you as far as our podcast and interacting with them?
I would think so. First, Ben Holden, CBS. Ben, again, spending a day with him last February, again, kind of shadowing his role as the play-by-play voice of CBS college hockey. Just an overall really good dude. And again, I think he's a guy that with his experience and just his personality, just very, very good guy to talk to. That's one of mine. I actually really did also enjoy Mosko's interview, honestly. Mm-hmm. Mosko's a guy where, there's so much that intrigues, I think, the St. Cloud State fan base about Bob Mosko, and certainly the transition from this university to the University of Minnesota. And you really got the sense of just how much he cares about his players and how much he cares about his programs that he's there. It's no question to see why the University of Minnesota right now currently is number 1 in basically all the polls. That team is playing some really good hockey, and you can just tell that he's a committed human being. And we got a lot of that in his answers, and I think that was just really, really cool. Another guest that I think should run up top 3, and granted, I think it's hard to really pick 3 definite people. But I think just in terms of the story, in terms of just the inspiration, Janine Alder, to me was a really, really good guest, just because of just the story and the things that she's had to deal with, and just how open she was, and just how every step of the way, from when everything set into the things that she had to go through to get back to where she was, contemplating some things about the future. Jeannie, just a very inspirational person, and just how very intelligent and intellectual she was very, very cool. I really enjoyed the conversation with her as well. Noah, I'm curious as to if you had a couple yourself that has stuck out to you during the year 2020 from the folks we've had on.
I do. And you hit the nail right on the head talking about how this list of 3 is by no means, definitive or comprehensive by any means. I mean, almost every one of our guests, we just love having them on. Truly and honestly. I only had one repeat one for you here, Nick. But before we get to that one of mine, and this is probably more for not the on interview segment, but the off interview segment. And I think that trend continues through my entire list. First one was Kevin Fitzgerald. I know we didn't sit down for a long interview with him, but Kevin off the screen is even funnier than he is on the screen, because of course we try to keep it PG, and Kevin has some very, very funny jokes. And of course, some of his teammates were kind of messing with him a little bit that day when he was down in the player lounge. So Kevin was an absolute blast to have on. He kind of got gypped a little bit, I think. I don't know what we were doing that day with time management, but he only ran about 25 minutes. So I don't know, maybe we have to bring him back for another 10 minutes to give him another crack at the old can, if you will. Played pretty well in the pod too, so you got to like that. Another person that stuck out for me, I think it's, I don't know if it's a default that media people are just, easy to relate with a little bit, but I think it's just, they're very articulate. So it's very easy for us to connect with us, a lot of commonalities. And for me, Jim Erickson was one of those people, because we sat down and did the interview for about 45, 50 minutes with Jim. But then we sat down for probably a good 2.5 hours after we talked to him. And we just talked about life. We talked about broadcasting and had a lot of good laughs there. And it was just a really nice end cap to kind of a dreary Wednesday as we were transitioning from fall into the winter months. So I thought that one was a lot of fun. The last one on my list, Nick, and fittingly so, as you mentioned, was Ben Holden. And I think the reason that Ben stands out to me, besides the fact that Ben Holden's going to do what Ben Holden wants to do. I mean, he doesn't really have any restraint as far as he's just going to be who he is. And I love that, how he doesn't really change from off camera to on camera. But I think the other reason it sticks out is, of course, when we follow through into the pod as well, he's a guy who interacts with us and genuinely, we consider him a close friend of the show. And I think that that's something that, for a guy who works at CBS to think about us as the quote unquote little guys and to want to come back on our show and that sort of thing. It just means a lot, I think, from my perspective. And very fittingly so, he's number 4 on our list as far as interviews are concerned. Talking about the setup for the NCHC pod, this one's probably the only more, I don't want to say controversial, but we do talk about the pandemic a little bit in this interview. So there is a reason for that, because really he's actually talking about how the NCHC pod was able to complete what they had hopefully intended. So Ben Holden is our number 4 guest on this list.
Yeah, it's going to be strange. But I think our country needs sports. I've said that throughout this whole thing. And I've said this too, guys, that I'm going to get a little patriotic here. We can do this as a country. And there's a lot of us that are doing it. What I mean by doing it is doing the right things. Don't go out and be an idiot. But, we can't control people. It's just, and I've been out there for 4 weeks. I've been on not 4 full weeks, but I've been on 4 trips. So I've been on the road 16 days in the last 5 weeks. I'm pretty spoiled at West Point. We're basically on post. There's not many people around. So it's pretty easy to stay away. But some of the things I've seen on planes and heard on planes and seen in airports, we got a long way to go as a country. Sorry to go off on this tangent here a little bit, but it's just near and dear to my heart. And I guess with all that said, like I said a minute ago, I think we need sports. And this can be done if we do it the right way. And I believe, I don't know anything about the plan for the NCHC in terms, the logistics of the plan. I'm not privy to that. But it'll be done right. And I think that our fans need that. I think they need the outlet. Life's hard, man, for a lot of people. It's tough. It doesn't matter if you're, in your 40s, your 30s, your 20s. I mean, I got a 19-year-old son, and it's challenging. And so I just hope that games will be played. I certainly hope that I'll be doing a lot of games, whatever that means. I don't know right now. And I hope that all of us that are involved and love the sport can just get around it, and get around it, whether it's doing it like this or watching games online or watching them on TV, whatever that is. I just think we need that. It's important. It really is, guys. Sorry, I get a little choked up when I talk about that, but it just means a lot to me. And I seen some things that just leads me to the point where I'm like, we got a long way to go. I mean, I said to you, Nick, offline, prior to doing football at Army on the 5th of September, I hadn't called a game in 6 months. And you touched on it with Dave and I, it was the 28th of February. And I flew home the 29th, and I'd heard a few things, like, oh, there's this virus and blah, blah, blah. And I mean, I've been flying on planes for a long time. I feel like, and none of us are invincible. But, jokingly, I've been living in a petri dish for a lot of years. So, I feel pretty good about that part, but that doesn't matter at the end of the day. But I guess, my point on this is, when I flew home that day after we hung out on the 28th, if you would have told me I would have been at home until the 3rd of September, I would have never believed you. And, I'm a grateful guy, guys. I'm a positive guy. And I'm tenfold that now in both departments, because I'm not going to let this beat me down. And I hope that it doesn't beat other people down, but I know it is beating a lot of people down. And, whether it's mentally, financially, physically, whatever it is, the first game I did, man, I couldn't help but think about all the people that work in our field that haven't done it. I mean, I got chills talking about it with you guys, and you just think about them. I mean, there's people I work with at CVS that haven't done a football game yet. So I'm just a grateful guy, and I appreciate everything I got. And I just, again, we need college hockey. The players want to play. The coaches want to play. I know those that are making the decisions are going to do the right things. They're going to make sure everyone's as safe as possible. And that's first and foremost, is safety and health. No matter what we're doing in life, that's number one. And I'm confident in the people that run our league. They're going to do a great job, whatever we do, man. But I'm ready to go, boys. Sorry, I got a little emotional there on you, man, but I just
And as always, Ben Holden, very grateful to have him on the show. And again, as you mentioned, Noah, beforehand, we'll have to have him back again. A very just overall great character, very intelligent human being, and just a wonderful play-by-play broadcaster. Did an excellent job down there in the pod at Baxter Arena. Just an incredible human being as well. And that kind of gets us to the point. I mean, I know that, what the NCHC pod and what the holidays, there's definitely plenty of things to be thankful for, even though 2020 in a nutshell has been, quite the, up and down road, to put it very lightly for some folks. No, I'm curious, do you have any, I guess, 3 things that you're thankful for the year 2020 that you want to share to our viewers?
Sure. The first one, and not really directly related to the podcast, but somewhat close, is just college hockey in general. Being able to, especially the team that we cover, getting an opportunity to see them play 9 hockey games. And then on the women's side, seeing them be able to play 6 games and experience it with the best fans in college hockey. I know we talk about that all the time, but, the ability to be able to essentially cover and showcase what we've been waiting all spring and summer for, I think is really, really exciting. So really, really happy about that. The other thing that I am really thankful for is my family. And I know that's probably a very obvious one, but the reason I say that is because, Nick, as well as I do that, I transitioned out of graduate school at the beginning of May, and, not even a month later, I was in my new major, and now I just, earned a scholarship, getting ready to start in January and move back to a school that I've gone to before and start almost a completely new career path. So for my family to be there with me, and for them to kind of take me in for 9 months during a pandemic, and, make accommodations for myself, who's now 24, and, they help chip in with my first pair of glasses that I'm wearing as well. So those little things, they don't have to do that. I don't need to be handed anything anything. So I'm very, very thankful for everything that they have contributed for me. The last thing that I am thankful for here, Nick, this one might come as a shock to you. Are you ready for it? Are you sure you're ready for it?
Do I need to put on the seatbelt?
You might, to be honest with you, because I don't think you've ever heard this before. The number one thing that I am thankful for this holiday season is the guy that's sitting on the screen with me. Nick, I know you're waiting for the cheesy moment here, but I'm
waiting for the punchline, actually.
You're waiting to find out that you actually got punked.
Yes.
And I say that not, in kind of a bromance, sappy sort of way, but you think about it, Nick, we've only known each other for probably about 14 months. I mean, and to think that, our friendship has stemmed to you being, willing to start this project that was, I don't even know if you want to call it a passion project, but just starting this podcast with me and saying, yeah, I'll do that once a week and we'll see where it goes. To be able to do that through a pandemic, you work like 3 jobs, you're going to school, I'm working, to be able to, make time for, myself and my interests that align with your interests to bring content to our fans, this is honestly a dream come true, because when I growing up, everybody wanted to play in the NHL. I wanted to talk about college hockey and play college hockey. That was my dream. And I never got to do it at the Division I level, but to be able to sit here and interact with our great guests, like that, you talk about how instrumental Bill Prout is. It definitely doesn't happen without a co-host that does so much for our stuff. So honestly, from the bottom of my heart, I am super thankful that you're here with me on this journey, and that you consider me a friend off the air too. We're not just business colleagues. We genuinely connect on another level. So to gain a best friend that enjoys all the things that I do, and we get to put out a product because of that, it's just incredible to me. So thank you. I set you up with terrible transitions. So what are your 3 things that you're thankful for? Because I can't imagine I'm on the list. So.
Well, let's see. I'm waiting for the water balloons and dry. No, we're still good. Okay.
You're going to get slimed later.
Yes. Those were some good days, the Nickelodeon slime,
yes.
If that's what you're referring to.
Yep.
But I guess starting with number 3, I'm thankful again to our viewers, because again, without them and, us, we talk about passion from, doing the content creation standpoint, we do this also because we're fans too, right? So we love the sport and we love interacting with the fans, hearing their ideas, their thoughts, responding to them, maybe take some that we don't maybe necessarily agree with and, giving our take on them. So really thankful to the fans that help drive us and keep our passion high, especially like you mentioned during a pandemic where, we essentially had nothing to talk about really progressively for a while now. We were able to really keep a conversation going that was informative, fun, and creative. So again, it doesn't happen without them. Number 2, this is going to be kind of weird, but thankful for anybody that's in the medical field and definitely the scientists. And the reason why I say that is this pandemic has been challenging for a lot of people, whether it be personally, professionally, obviously students, tell me somebody that is not been affected at all by this pandemic. We've all been touched in some way, some worse than others, again, with maybe relatives having fallen ill or maybe some passing away from it. And with the medical staff that has to essentially go into the fire every single day, whether you work at the hospital, at a clinic, having to deal with patients here and there. And then the scientific community where now we have a vaccine and a couple of them that are now being distributed here in the US that essentially in almost an unfathomable timeline, Noah, to have these things developed and then approved. Without them, now we're seeing at least a little light at the end of the tunnel where now the frontline workers are actually starting to get their vaccines. It's a 2-part vaccine, but it's helping us look ahead to maybe June or July and say, we might actually get to the point where we're over the hump a little bit and permanently, right? Potentially. So we still don't know, obviously, that, but without them, there isn't any hope, or there isn't maybe any sort of, treatment that we can look forward to say, at some point we can get back to normal. So we got to be thankful for them.
Normally I wouldn't interject. I shouldn't say normally I wouldn't. I interject all the time, but I do want to interject for the specific purpose that that one is also a near and dear thing for both of us. You have a significant other who's in the medical field. I have my mother, my aunt, my other aunt, and my cousin, who are all nurses, and I'm going into the medical field as well. And, my mom just got her vaccine on Wednesday, and, like, she cried on the way home, because of the challenges and everything, that they've had to deal with. I think it's important for people to know that, I really appreciate that comment, because even when you look on TV and you hear all these things, all these medical people, they're going through this, or they did this, those stories, they almost quote unquote get old, if you will, just because we're exposed to them so much. But truly and honestly, from those of us who experience it like you and I do firsthand or secondhand, if you will, it takes a toll on families, and the stuff that they've had to go through is very, very immense. So I really appreciate that comment. And I just wanted to put that out there, because it's very, very impactful for you and I and people who have to interact with people or know people in the medical field. So
correct. And at the end of it, we're all going to be, at some point in our lifetime, tell me something that doesn't come up with some kind of medical thing. For some of us, it's a pandemic. Others, it's, I'm going to call it the more normal aging stuff. But, at some point you're going to have to, come to the services of a medical professional, and, they're called to be in a higher duty scenario, like we are in a pandemic. And again, without these great minds and these very brave people that have to go in to essentially a fire, not knowing, how to put it out per se for at least the first 9 or so months here. That tells you just kind of where we're at. I don't think that point, especially that gets, really communicated enough. And again, we owe a great deal to those people, again, developing the vaccine as well, but taking care of everybody from March until today. Again, just can't really thank them enough. But number one, actually, no, it is you. And so I don't have a lever where I can pull down and there's confetti. I know there's no slime coming down. That'd be a really long fishing line at the trail from here all the way to to Botno, North Dakota. But I do remember, and this is why it's kind of impactful for me, because we both are very passionate human beings about the game of hockey, right? And I do remember, I didn't know it was you the first time, but the first exhibition game for men's I was doing, the television part of it for Husky Productions, you were doing the radio version of it. And we walked by each other, and I don't think we know who it was. And I think you remember saying this to me off the air a couple of times, that you looked at me and you were scared of me. I'm like, dude, I'm 5'9". Like, you don't have nothing to be scared of, because you're like over 6 feet tall. So, but it was was it either the weekend after that or 2 weeks after we did our first game together? Northeastern, yes. Yeah. And it was one of those deals where when you connect as hockey people, it's just like that. You can call it a bromance. You can call it like a brother from another mother. I don't know what it was, but what was supposed to be probably like maybe a 15-minute pregame ended up turning into a 30-minute pregame. And it was like the most natural, information filled pregame show that we've ever done. And it was just like we clicked right away, right? And at the end of it, again, we took on this project back in January. In fact, we wanted to do the video of this right away. We actually had more people that were at the Herb. We might have to do that sometimes. I still have some footage from that to kind of like the first episode that we tried. And the reason kind of almost the pandemic helped us, Noah, was, we had this really great ambition to do almost like a Sports Center 3 camera thing. Mm-hmm. And it would take certainly more than us two to be able to pull it off. And we had that initially, and then we didn't. We still tried it with the two of us. We actually had a pretty decent recording with the two of us. But when the pandemic hit, we switched back to all audio, and we did something, I guess, similar to this. And then we came back to video, and it's almost essentially gave us an opportunity to really grow it in a way that was, like, I guess, more natural, because, I don't know if this show would have sticked as easily if nobody else was doing it the way we're doing. So again, but thankful for all the work that you do, for definitely allowing me to be able to talk about hockey, whether it's college or NHL, every single week. And yeah, man.
I remember on a last tangent before we get back to we have 3 more interviews to get to, and two of them are quite lengthy. Not quite lengthy. They're a little around 10 minutes, I should say. But I remember when we recorded our first quote unquote episode down at the Herb, because we were talking about Matt Dumba and the trade potential for the Minnesota Wild. And you set up these cameras, and of course the space was a lot more limited than we had expected. But I remember sitting in front of it, and you're like, yeah, you just look at the camera when you're talking to the camera. And I remember being I remember being just terrified. I'm like, oh, so I just look at the camera that nobody's there. I just look and I talk to the camera. You're like, yeah, don't look at me. And I'm like, but I want to look at you. You're the one that's supposed to be helping me. And you're like, no, you just look at the camera. I remember being just terrified. So you're sitting there, and you're like, Matt Dumba, obviously, he's a big part of the Minnesota Wild. And you're just sitting there, you're sitting back in the chair, you're relaxed. And I'm in the, in the other seat on the right. And I'm just like, yeah, Matt Dumba, he's something else. We should probably find that clip. The other problem is, if anybody knows anything about video editing, each of those it's almost like 4K resolution, if you will. Each of those video clips, it was only a 45-minute segment. Each of those is like 3 or 4 gigabytes a piece. So that's a lot of work. But sorry that we couldn't bring this to you from the Herb. We had some complications, if you will. So.
Yeah. Yes. To say that, but is it Janine? It is the next snapper.
It is Janine, and it's fun. And it's funny that it transitioned into Janine, because Janine was part of our early days as far as the podcast was concerned. She was actually our very last episode and interview, episode number 4, in the first week of March, right before spring break when the pandemic hit. So really excited to talk about to have this interview, because I think it goes under the radar because most people listen to our later shows. I remember when she told this story, and the second time that she was injured, she talks about it. This was actually, she took a slap shot to the head in practice during her senior year last year. And that's what kind of led to the second bout of what she's about to talk to. So we won't leave you in suspense with this interview, but for us, I remember sitting there. It was such an impactful thing. And we thank Janine very, very much for being willing to share that with us, especially in our early days of our career. So Janine Alder from episode number 4.
Yeah, and then you talk into kind of moving into a little bit of another piece that I know we do have to touch on. National team tournament, you are, if you can remind me, I believe it's actually the topic of your second book as well. Kind of take us through the process for those who don't know. I believe that into a little bit of another piece that I know we do have to touch on. National team tournament, you are, if you can remind me, I believe it's actually the topic of your second book as well. Kind of take us through the process for those who don't know. I believe the term that you used is seizure epilepticus. Is that correct? So
it's called status epilepticus, which is such like a prolonged seizure where you can get out of it yourself. So a normal epileptic seizure usually lasts a couple minutes. You're unconscious and you can get out of it yourself. But mine was a status, which you can't get out of it yourself.
So I believe you said this happened during the national tournament. Can you kind of take us through a little bit of, I know it touches on what the book is about a little bit, but just kind of take us through that process, what that event was like and kind of how it occurred and how the event's processed.
Yeah, so it was during the IHF World Championship in 2019 last year, and we faced the U.S. national team in that Sunday game, and I knew that it's gonna be a tough game because they're a strong team, they're a big nation, and so I was drinking a lot of water throughout the day, and this gave me some kind of disbalance in my body with sodium levels, and during the game I was sweating a lot, and so it's kind of called like hyponatremia. So I was low in sodium, and this caused the seizure essentially after the game.
Take us through the emotions. As you hear the medical jargon, you hear about what it does, but from your perspective, did you have a sense that something was coming, or did, from a lot of folks, I know that every experience is different, but take us through what that process was to go through and just your emotions during that time.
Yeah, so I was fine after the game. I was sad about like the result, though. I was just trying so hard to get some kind of like a decent result out of the game. I didn't give up at all, and so after the game I was just sad. And then sooner as we left for the hotel, I felt very nauseous, so I felt weird, and I was like, maybe either I can go and throw up and get rid of it and it'll be fine and I can eat, or just eat something and I'll be fine. But as soon as I sat down at the dinner table, the whole thing just like crashed, and it overcame me, and I lost control of my body completely. So
yeah, and you talked about a little bit too the family perspective as well. Can you kind of take us through your parents' reaction and kind of what the time was like? I believe was it in the hospital in Finland? Is that correct?
Exactly. I think it was like the toughest for my surroundings, because for myself I was in the situation of they needed to help me, and after a certain point that night I was sedated, so I was asleep, and my surroundings were probably suffering the most, especially my parents, about not knowing what happens or what happened, and will this ever be getting better again, or what kind of situations they're in right now. And it was a tough situations, especially for my parents, and that's why I wrote the book, especially for them too.
I think it's important to discuss, the perspective change. So I know especially when, because especially as a young adults, you don't normally go through these types of things. You hear about them maybe from people who are older or others, but when you go through something like this, there's definitely something that you look at things differently. Do you feel like you are looking at life, hockey, and just your future outlook any differently since that incident?
Absolutely. So I was just talking to our assistant coach a couple days ago. You never, like in life, you never ask for adversity, because why would you? But then just life gives you adversity so you can grow as a person. And I feel like I was able to grow as a person during that time, because I was able to physically recover from it, and now getting a different perspective on my life here as well, and like sitting on a bench and seeing everything from the outside helped me to actually like accept that there might be life after sports, and I need to approach, if I want to continue playing, I need to approach it differently, so I don't get too much of like sucked into the sport, so nothing else can take place in my life.
Was there an initial, like, when obviously your senior season didn't appear in as many games, but how difficult was it for you to watch from the bench from those initial recovery efforts from that game?
Yeah, so maybe I need to explain. So over summer I was able to recover to a certain amount, to a certain point. I felt ready for the senior season to take on, but as soon as I arrived on campus again in August, I was overloaded with stress, and I couldn't process the stress that I feel here as much as I was able before. And so I suffered a second seizure in October, which then led into the question of why these seizures are happening, because I basically recovered fully. And so over Christmas break, we were able to do tests at home, and we finally figured out that the severe seizure in April caused a long-term damage that needs to be treated. And that gave me some kind of peace, because I was finally relieved about like knowing what truly is wrong with me right now. And so I was able to hopefully serve the team in the best kind of manner that I was able to do for this season as a captain.
Yeah, you appear October 20th in Minnesota. You play a really close game, actually a game that you guys had a really strong chance of winning at Ritter Arena. Then you have the event happen in practice. You don't return until senior day against Duluth. You play the last 6.5 minutes of that game, record 6 saves, perfect at the end of that game. How important was it for you to be able to experience that moment and just jump in the blue paint one more time?
I didn't expect it at all. So coach he didn't tell me anything beforehand, because he didn't know about the result of the game. And so a couple minutes into the third period, assistant coach came to me and asked me if I would like to play the last 5 minutes, and I was just like, if that's okay with the whole team, I would like to do that, and I'd like to show my parents too that I'm fine, and that I can go back and play, and that I need to approach the game from a different aspect, that I give myself the chance to play again. And so it was an awesome experience.
And again, thank you to Janine Alder. Just again, a very passionate story, just incredibly impactful, as you mentioned before, Noah, and just overall, just a really good human being. She is playing hockey over back in Switzerland, so good for her to be back on the ice, and hope she's staying healthy through all this. But on a lighter note, Noah, it is Christmas Day. Again, we're recording this, and there's a couple of traditions I think most people have, and that is there's certainly a couple of Christmas movies that I think everybody watches, whether it's every year or maybe even you stick some in after Thanksgiving to kind of get yourself into the holiday spirit. I'm curious to know your three most favorite holiday movies that maybe you either play every single year or maybe it's a Christmas Day tradition. Tell me what those movies might be.
Sure. I'll start on the dark end of this a little bit. This is a movie that probably, I don't know, would be in most people's top three, but I love the storyline and I love the various adaptations of it. And it's one that I've always enjoyed as a kid. But probably the best depiction of that as far as the modern day is concerned is 2009's A Christmas Carol with Jim Carrey and essentially Ebenezer Scrooge, and talking about that story. I always found that story fascinating ever since I was a kid. That's probably just a little, I don't know, nostalgia, if you will, that came to life in 3D, if you will. So I always enjoyed that movie. Number two, going back to my childhood again, Nick, The Polar Express with Tom Hanks as the lead in that one, or one of the leads, I should say. I always liked that movie just because it's a real, especially for kids and parents alike, just a really good feel-good Christmas movie. I always liked it. And I think as a kid, I used to have the Polar Express book, and that's what I started with. And then that movie came out about a year later after I got the book. So it all just kind of transcended very, very nicely. Number one on my list, Nick, as much as I love Home Alone, and Home Alone should probably be in this list, A Christmas Story. That movie just gets me something fierce, absolutely funny, watching him stick his tongue and get it frozen on the pole, watching him almost shoot his eye out with the BB gun. That is just a fantastic movie. And I like that movie as well because that's one of my dad's favorite movies as well. So a really good family bonding moment there. Nick, I'm curious to hear what your three ones are as I try to squint. For those of you that are listening to the audio podcast, if you don't know, if you're watching the YouTube version, you are noticing by now. I have a door that is in the porch that I'm sitting on that doesn't have a blind, so I'm a little blinded myself right now. So Nick, I'm going to listen to your story, but I probably won't watch you tell it, if that makes sense.
Good. You don't have to see my face there for a little bit. So maybe you're actually liking this segment. Number three, I guess I only have one really childhood one. That one is I guess the Christmas Charlie Brown. The old Charlie Brown ones are good. The Christmas tree still gets me, man. It's just, I don't know what it is, and it's funny because they've kind of become a weird kind of like I guess, fashion trend this year. Yeah. I guess was it Target and some others are kind of selling those. And, again, just a very classic tale. I've always liked, even the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, those were always kind of again, with the Thanksgiving ones. So any of the Charlie Brown holiday ones were always a good one for me to watch. Home Alone 2 is my second one. Yep. And it's two, just because the New York one, I think just it takes things up a little another level. Again, with the apartments and then being in the big city, the fireworks show at the end. There's some pretty funny moments. And again, I think Joe Pesci, who was the pretty much, as far as his cinematic career goes, kind of the absolute mobster. And obviously you realize that now as an adult, but at the end, he's like, this is this short, really high-pitched guy that seems to be walking into every single trap. And then, of course, Marv, the ultimate goofball. So I guess that one was always a good laugh. But speaking of laugh, number one, I'm sure I'm not alone on this list, and that's going to be National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation starring Chevy Chase. There's just so many good moments, in that show. It's just, you can almost have an entire show dedicated to that movie. Just the neighbor rivalry, just when the uncle or the uncle comes around, and of course there's every stereotype between the old aunts and aunts, wrapping up the cat as a Christmas present, so many things going wrong with the Christmas tree. It's just hilarity every single second. It's such a good movie, and that's actually one that we no question watch every single year on either Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. Yeah, that's a good movie too. I don't know what it is. I love actually comedy movies, but I guess when I think about Christmas, I don't know what it is. Maybe I just don't think about the comedic side. Maybe because they're just maybe go-tos, and I don't know what it is. I don't know.
It's funny you mentioned, I think earlier in the segment too, you mentioned how, our ages and that sort of thing. When you had talked about brother from another mother, it made me think about when you were talking about your childhood for Christmas. I'm thinking like, that's a good 10, 15 years before my childhood. I don't know if it's brother. I don't know if it's brother from another mother, more like, father and son relationship here. But
it's brother. You were the accident child. That's what it was.
Speaking of two not so children who had some childish laughs, though. I mean, we had a very, very good time with these two guests, and easily could have been in both of our top three as well. That's Hannah Patrikis and Alyssa Erickson at the time, but also Alyssa Winicky in real life. Real life? Does that make sense? Anyway, so they were number 2 on our list. And because Hannah Patrikis is the only person to this point on the Huskies Warming House podcast still to drop the ultimate F-bomb, but the story was just that good that I think it deserves the number 2 spot on our list. So Hannah Patrikis and Alyssa Winicky. It's pretty impressive. Kind of transitioning to, I know you guys probably have some stories about your playing days actually at St. Cloud State. A very odd one that I noticed, Hannah, your pregame ritual, you had to eat chocolate before coming. Is that a thing? Maybe you guys had a couple of bus trips that were kind of interesting. Whoever wants to start, do you guys happen to have any pretty fun stories being line mates for quite a few years on that team?
I'll start only because Lister made my dream come true. My very first game on campus. It was an exhibition game. Who the heck were we playing, Liz?
Wasn't it like Korea or something? Wasn't it like some international?
That was a different year. Shoot, I don't remember. Oh, we were playing the Whitecaps. That's who we were playing. Okay. We're playing Minnesota Whitecaps my freshman year. Little baby Hannah out there. I'm scared and then I'm like exhausted after the first shift. I'm like, okay, no one prepared me for this. But I get on a line with Lister, which was funny. Reuter had been talking to us for like the weeks before. It was like the very first day he put us on a line together for like stupid lines during practice. And he was like, oh my gosh, it's meant to be. So he puts us on a line together. And I think it was in the third period. Lister ends up like picking a puck from the player at the blue line, and we go down on 2-on-1. And Lister, if you get the right camera angle, it's actually a sick pass. Lister makes this beautiful, like if you pulled out your protractor, the angle on this sauce was like absolutely perfect. Sauces it over the T-stick. And I one-time it in, and then obviously the ref had to ruin my celly because she ran right into me and I fell over. But nonetheless, it was a sweet pass, sweet goal. I knew from that moment on there was just too many good things to come.
Alyssa, I feel like you might have a special honor on this show potentially. Do you happen to remember a certain bus trip and a certain sweep that might have happened? I don't know how you want to tell this story, but it was pretty interesting to listen to it pre-show.
Yeah, so Hannah might have to help me out a bit with the exact wording. But yeah, so we went on a long road trip to Lindenwood, who we wouldn't obviously normally play. I think it was like, how many hours was it, Han? Away?
Gosh, I think it was 12, and it was Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah, so that was fun. So we did like our team Thanksgiving dinner and stuff. Anyway, so we went to Lindenwood. We had 2 games against them. And we swept them. So that was great. And then a little bit of backstory, I guess. So our bus driver in St. Cloud, who would drive our team all over, he's the greatest guy ever. His name's Ron. I hope he hears this because I love Ron. He would drive the men's team too, and my husband Blake says all the same stories that he was just the best guy ever. So he would obviously be there driving us in the bus. So he'd come in and watch all the games. He knew all of our stats. He knew our record. He knew everything, like more than what we would know. It was great. So Ron was just a great team player. So we got on the bus to leave Lindenwood after playing them. And I don't remember his exact words, but he laid on the horn. And Hannah, what did he say? I don't even remember exactly.
It wasn't even like laying on the horn. It was just like nonstop laying like for like a minute. And as he's backing the bus out of the rink. And like if you've ever been to Lindenwood, their current rink is like it was probably worse than City Arena in downtown Detroit. Like it was awful. So he's backing up, and as soon as he puts it in the drive, we're driving away, and he just goes, "We just swept the out of them.
Yeah, it was really great.
The best part though, like that whole weekend, like Lister said, it was Thanksgiving. That actually put us at my freshman year, Lister's sophomore year, that put us on a 7-game win streak. So it wasn't even just like we swept them. It was like, holy crap, the St. Cloud State women's hockey team won 7 games in a row. Like, what? That's unheard of. And so that was kind of the icing. But that, like I said, Thanksgiving, the weekend started off so sketchy. We left like on a Wednesday. And so we're like slowly making our way. I think Wednesday night we like stopped and ate at like some like Ho Chunk casino and had dinner in the casino. And it was like, we're like, where the heck are we? Stayed the night at a hotel in like Reuter's hometown. We like had practice in Reuter's hometown. He's like about to start crying on the ice, telling us about how like he raised his family here. We're like, this is the weirdest week already. So then Thanksgiving rolls around. And we're like, yeah, we had practice. We're like, yeah, going to Thanksgiving dinner. Like, we're pumped. Like, what are we having? We pull up to a Best Western. And we're like, wait, it's Thanksgiving. We actually had some pretty dang good food. It was a Best Western buffet. Like, they had, like, a big, like, light-up sign out like, out front that was, like, Thanksgiving dinner buffet, like best food in town. I'm like, yeah, this town's pretty small. That's not saying a whole lot, but nonetheless, pretty good food. Left there, 7-game win streak. Not too shabby of a weekend.
Nick, we're almost down to our last interview and our number 1 interview segment of 2020 for the Huskies Warming House podcast. But before we get to that, we have our last trio of essentially a trio to get to as well. And that's kind of our craziest gifts or best gifts that we've seen within our lifetime a little bit. And once again, thank you to Hannah Patrigas and Alyssa Winicky for joining us in that episode as well. I probably should give them kudos as well. But I'm curious to know, in your lifetime, which is more expanded than mine, what your craziest gifts would have been. I mean, did you think a flip phone was a crazy gift back in your day? Because I guess I don't really remember that transition period.
It probably would have been back in the day. The Moto Razors, as was the kind of the big popular flip phone, because it had that very flat metal I guess sheen to it. So you didn't have actual buttons you pushed. It was more like a touch sensitive thing, and it just had that look that was, I guess, really captivating. And the other one back in the day was the T-Mobile Sidekick. For those who didn't know, it looked almost like a Game Boy, and the screen, instead of like sliding up, it would flip up. So it just had that cool movement to it. I wasn't that cool kid back in the day. In fact, my parents didn't allow us to have cell phones at all, even before we were in high school, even when we started driving. So I was the kid without a cell phone through high school. So, but as far as 3 crazy gifts, first one I can think of, it was actually not just one that I received. It was one that me and my 3 sisters all got. I remember waking up, and this was back in the Stone Age. But we go into the family room, and there was not 1, not 2, but 3 Power Wheels cars that my parents had bought. I'm not sure how they were able to assemble these things, not wake anybody up, and get them into the family room without anybody like hearing a peep. But it was kind of cool because, I mean, I personally got like a camo Jeep. My older sister got like a Barbie pink Corvette, and then my other sister got like a red Jeep. And it sounds lame in its sense, but back in the 90s, that was a cool thing.
I kind of figured that you were getting the pink Jeep, but maybe that was just me.
I thought about the pink Corvette because I'm like, I want the convertible, but nah. So, but what ended up happening was kind of funny. So we brought them in the basement. I don't know how we got them down the stairwell, but it ended up being where you would think, oh, these are 3 kids, they're just going to drive around. It almost became like a freaking demolition derby with the 3 cars. So it ended up being, I guess, pretty fun. And I guess that was kind of just kind of a cool thing because it was something I wasn't expecting. Number 2 on my list was probably, it's weird because it doesn't have the ultimate prize, which I wanted, but I got tickets to the 2004 All-Star, I guess, I want to call it. It was first a practice. So they got to see both the West and the East guys practice. But then they also became like the All-Star experience. So that's where they got to go around and shoot pucks and then wait in line to have a picture with the Stanley Cup. And man, that was super, super fun. I think we waited in line for about 2.5 hours to actually get to the cup. And, Phil Pritchard, who was actually the keeper of the cup, was there. And my cousin at the time, actually, he was the one that was up in line first. We had kind of gone with 3 or 4 of us, and he looked at him and goes, "Can I kiss it? Is that cool?" And he's like, "Yeah, man." So not only did we get to, hold the cup, we get to kiss the cup. So I can say I've kissed the Stanley Cup. So yeah, for me. Number one crazy gift though, and this one's probably something I know you're not going to expect when it came, because it came in a backpack, and it sounds lame, but when I opened up this bag, it was materials and textbooks, and what was in post-its, it was flight lessons. My mother is a flight attendant for Delta Airlines, originally Northwest before they merged. And I guess ever since I was a kid, I was always a huge aviation enthusiast. And one of my first career paths that I chose was to be an airline pilot. And, sort of the thing that I guess she thought would be cool is let's get him into ground school. So 14 years old, I took ground school, basically at Thunderbird Aviation, which is out of a small airport called, Thunderbird, down at Flying Cloud, which is in Eden Prairie. And I do remember my first actual lesson, you take off in this small, was a Piper Warrior, for those who know aviation, it's a small, 4-seat aircraft. Mm-hmm. And we got up, we took off, and this is probably January, February, so still snow on the ground. We maybe get up about 1 minute, and then all of a sudden, you're on the headsets and you go through the whole air traffic control. All of a sudden he goes, "All right, it's your controls." I'm like, okay. Right. So then here's me, 14 years old, flying an aircraft for the next hour, and then we get to go into a landing and everything else. So that was really, really cool. In fact, I do hope to, I do have a couple of hours under my belt. I actually do want to go back and finish my private pilot certification after school and some other things settle down, just because I love traveling. I love flying. It's a big passion of mine as far as the hobby is concerned. And so I guess that's probably the number one craziest thing I've ever got. And I didn't crash it, so that's good. Right.
Roger that.
Roger.
Can you stop flying in a circle, please? You need to go straight at some point here.
It's funny to think, because when he said your controls, I guess I was expecting it at some point, but I wasn't expecting it to go 60 seconds after takeoff. So luckily, again, ground school, they teach you all that. It wasn't like I was completely new to this. I knew what I was doing, and
I would have waited until right before you started to land, because if anyone knows, landing is probably the hardest part. I would have said your controls, and then I would have played dead in the back seat. That would have been just me. But
what about your 3?
So yeah, on that note, I've always wanted to get a pilot's license too, but people don't realize, that's an expensive endeavor. If you're going to do it, you got to be dedicated to do it. So kudos to that. And I do have a friend that has offered, he flies for North Star helicopter and the hospitals up here, and he lives in Vegas. So he said when the pandemic is over and everything's back to normal, he'll fly me down to Vegas. I can stay at his place and go see a Golden Knights game, which is kind of cool. So I'm definitely going to do that. My 3, number 1, crazy gift just because of the age. I got a shotgun when I was 7 years old. Because I was learning how to hunt and that sort of thing. And I think I got my first BB gun when I was 5. So yeah, that's, I don't know. I don't know if I had a kid, if I would be giving my kid a shotgun at 7, but I guess
America, right?
America, Second Amendment. I do also remember that same Christmas. That was the first time I got a PlayStation. I got a PS2, and we got NHL 06, and that was when I always liked playing with Philip Kuba. That was my favorite player to play as. So that was kind of an interesting Christmas, if you will. It was actually in Alexandria, Minnesota, at my grandpa's place. Number 2 on this list, Nick. This one was more recent. It was in my college years. The 2 years that I was playing hockey in college, our goaltender, very nice guy by the name of Kenny, very tall dude, very good goaltender as well. He had a roommate who they kind of did a little mini gift giving where your limit was $5 or $10 and you just get him a simple gift or that sort of thing. Well, it turns out this one kid that was in his room hadn't seen the movie Elf yet, which is absurd to me. But
that's absurd.
So he goes and he gets this, this other guy gets him this gift, and he gets, the movie, unpacks it, the movie Elf, I'm really excited to watch this. Kenny goes, "Yeah, I was in that movie." We're like,
"What?"
We're like, "What are you talking about, Kenny? You weren't in that movie." He goes, "No, I was one of the kids." We're like, "No, you weren't. Shut up. You weren't in the movie Elf." So he shows us the official documentation, and he has pictures from the day that the set came to his school, and he's one of the little kids in the scene where all the little kids are going crazy. He got $400 as a 5-year-old to be in this movie as one of the little kids. So my collegiate goaltender was actually in the movie Elf, and we would have never known it had this other kid not seen Elf and gotten Elf for our little Christmas giveaway. So my college goaltender was actually in that movie. So I tell people that it's a really good party story, because I think it endears me immediately to a lot of people for something I had no hand in whatsoever. So great movie and pretty iconic for a lot of people. My number one craziest gift, Nick, and it doesn't have anything to do with any specific gift. It was from ages about 3 to 5 or 6 years old. We have tons and tons of family video. So you got to remember, this is like 1999 or 2000 through like 2002 or something like that. I think you were in like high school or something at that point.
Awkward, school, but thanks.
Awkward, right? But I used to have this habit, and it's so funny to watch, where I would open up a gift, right? I, go through all the packaging, open it up, and I'd go, wow, what is it? and like, you would think for a couple of gifts, you would do that for like occasional ones where you legitimately didn't know. No, I did it for like 80% of the gifts. Like, unless I knew exactly what it was, I go, whoa, oh my gosh, what is it? So that's essentially my entire childhood videos, pertaining opening Christmas gifts. Speaking of childhoods, Nick, and not only childhoods, but spending a fair amount of time with a little bit of nostalgia, our number one interview, and I'm really excited to get to this one because, as you mentioned earlier, it is Bob Motzko and his story, talking about St. Cloud. It was a really fun interview. And I know that when we went into that interview, and knowing obviously, you never know kind of how Bob Motzko's feeling on a given day as far as a media interview is concerned. So to get and it's too bad we don't have it on video, but you can hear it in his voice, to get the emotional reaction that we did for him to open up about his time at St. Cloud. I went back and listened back to it, obviously, as we were putting the show together. And I was like, I didn't cry, but I was like visibly, moved by this segment and listening to it back for the first time. So I hope all of our listeners really enjoy this final segment. This was our number one interview segment of 2020 from the Huskies Warming House Podcast, Bob Motzko.
And I want you to talk about your experience going to from a very prominent college, as you mentioned, from the days of being a paper boy with the Star Tribune and coming up to St. Cloud, which is essentially still a very young in terms of Division I, and you're kind of much tagged with kind of building up this program that it is today. So talk about that transition from the Gophers to St. Cloud and building up that program here in the Granite City.
Yeah, it was. Well, I always had my eye, if I could have picked a program that I wanted to coach, it was St. Cloud State. And as an assistant, as a young coach going through, and obviously very close with Craig Dahl, and when the whole thing worked there, for me to come back to St. Cloud State, it was an incredible opportunity for me, and 13 terrific seasons, years. We went in there. My youngest son at the time, I believe, was 1 year old when we moved to St. Cloud. My daughter was just going into first grade. We raised our kids in that community. So I know every nick and cranny, from the baseball fields to the soccer fields, to lacrosse fields. My wife knows them probably better than I do, but we had a tremendous experience there. And then coaching at St. Cloud State, and the change that we went through, and we did used to use a term that we were still in we weren't in our infancy as a program, but we were just a teenager. You think Gopher hockey right now is in our 100th year, and what it had gone through at Minnesota. And St. Cloud, of course, had a strong strong tradition of Division II hockey or Division III hockey. And we really embraced that to bring all those players, because they had hockey there since 31, 32, at 1931, 32, I believe was the year. And there was strong tradition. But it was the building, it was connecting the dots, from the Division I era with Herb Brooks was there just 1 year during Division III. Craig ushered it in. I think Craig was there 17 or 18 years that Craig was there. And we were still in a building mode, and terrific, the handoff from Herb pushing it to Division I, Craig taking it for 17 years. We were just that next step, and that's kind of how we viewed that. We needed to build that program to the next step, and we did it two ways. It was tying our past with the alumni, The community was always, great supporters of the program. But then we needed to raise it on and Craig had one of the greatest college teams. I'm going to miss the year. I think it was 1991, if I'm not mistaken. That was one of the best college teams in the country. And unfortunately, right during that era, back when they had region sites on campuses, they had to play at Michigan. They had to play University of Michigan in Michigan, which is such an unfair advantage. And I think Michigan knocked them off where they couldn't punch their ticket to the Frozen Four because that was a great team. We needed to punch tickets. We needed to raise our recruiting. We needed to have a culture where our kids really believed in what we were doing. Great staff, and Fred Harbinson, Mike Gibbons, Eric Rude, Garrett Raboyne joined us. Steve Johnson was with us for a bit. I mean, just a terrific staff and a slew of great goalie coaches that were volunteers that came through. One, we punched our ticket through to a Frozen Four in 13. Winning the McNaughton Cup it's really a big deal when you do something for the first time, and it validates what you're doing, and it not just doesn't validate, as much to me as a coach as it does to the players and believing what you're doing to the recruits, but your fan base that we belong playing against, North Dakota and. Yeah, we had so many firsts, sweeping North Dakota. We did that a couple times. Once that gets in your blood, beating Minnesota on a regular basis at that time, it gets in your blood. It gets into your fiber that you really believe you can do something. And that's really, I think, that we were so proud of. One, we had terrific student athletes, and they were doing great in the classroom. They're doing great on the ice. Won the McNaughton Cup. Then we won the NCHC regular season, NCHC playoffs, and I think it was 8 NCAA tournaments. And I say that I'm not bragging on that. I'm talking about that's the culture. That was what we were building inside our program, and a belief system with our fans, and really administration too, where President Potter came through about a year after I got there, and he really saw the vision of what we could do and was so instrumental in us being able to do the renovations to the National Hockey Center, the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. It was such a collective group of people that got on board to believe in what we were doing. And together with all of us, we were able to do some real special things. And it was a tremendous 13 years. And then, and I'll go back to and that's a long time in a coach's career to be somewhere for 13 years. I knew that there was probably another move in my career at some point, but there was so limited where I would go. And really the only college program that I would leave for as a passion project was the University of Minnesota. And, and I know I get beat up for it with a lot of the fans, but, I think the change is going to be healthy, one for me in my career, but it's also be healthy for St. Cloud State to hand it over when, let's face it, most coaches leave when they get asked to leave. It really happens that way. I think when it goes this way and you can hand it off, and Brett Larson's going to do a terrific job. I think there's some health to that you rarely see that it was a healthy transition, and it was healthy for me for maybe it's the last kick of the can for me at my age in coaching, and I'll look back at it. I know the fans beat me up for it. I get told that a lot, but I know years from now I'm going to look back and I'm going to really have I'm really going to know that it's real special that I got to be the head coach of 2 great college hockey programs in the same state, and only one other person can do that. His name's Herb Brooks.
What was the hiring process like at the University of Minnesota, and can you describe, sort of the decision to leave, and I suppose what perpetrated that, exact decision that this would be the handoff as you describe?
I will be short answered on this one. It was such a crazy short. We were playing in Sioux Falls, and the devastating loss that we had in Sioux Falls. with number one ranked team in the country. The next morning, I was standing in line at the hotel and my phone rang. And literally about 24 hours later, I was the coach at Minnesota. That's how fast it went. I had no time to think. I had an inkling that the call was coming. Nothing was worked out before. There was zero anything that went. But a process like that at a program like that, they move very quickly. And it was almost 24 hours later that it was over. So it was if you were going to do it, I had to make a decision very quickly, and it was hard. The hardest thing was, saying goodbye and leaving the players. And this is one thing I told our players: you're there for 13 years, and you get. And this isn't a job when you do this. You get very connected to families and these players. I'm not the perfect coach to all players, but I can tell you, you really have you really love your players when you have them. But they all leave me. And they all leave us. And I said, for the first time, I'm going to leave you. And, you think now it's only been 2 years since I've been gone, but there are very few players left at St. Cloud State when I was there. And that's how that transition kind of works, and it was harder on my middle son than anything, because he's still a Husky deep down in his heart. And that's all he knew as a young kid growing up. But you make the move and you transition. And like I said, I had a love affair with St. Cloud State and that hockey program and all the people there. And my son stayed back and graduated from St. Cloud Cathedral this year. So I have a feeling I will stay connected, throughout the rest of my life, and forever grateful for all the people and what happened. I wish nothing for the best. And I know we finally played for the first time, and that was weird. I can tell you it was very weird, and we're going to play again this year, and we'll be coming back to St. Cloud very soon too.
That's going to pretty much do it here for the Huskies Warming House podcast. What a fantastic interview again from Bob Motzko. Nick, what is your one New Year's resolution before we head off into the sunset of 2020?
Somehow get younger. No, I'm kidding. If only that were a thing. I guess for me is to try to get back in the gym a little bit more. I know it's been tough, especially with the pandemic, but also with, as you mentioned, I work a couple different jobs and going to school. So I guess I kind of felt a little lazy, to say it lightly, to kind of get back in the gym. So that's going to be my big New Year's resolution, to try to get some more muscle on the skin and bones that I am right now. So that's going to be my resolution. How about you, Noah? What's going to be yours for coming to 2021?
I think this one is very apt for the podcast. It's just calming down. I think maybe people don't know this, but it more than anybody. When it comes to the social media and some of the little things of the show, sometimes I don't want to say worked up, but I get a little fired up by things sometimes, and I don't let things roll off the shoulder as much as I should. So that's going to be my New Year's resolution, is staying a little bit calmer when it comes to hockey, because we both have a passion for it. So
millennials get triggered, man. I don't know what it is with you.
I don't know we want everything now. Instant gratification, Nick, now. Speaking of instant gratification, as soon as next week, we are going to be setting up, like we have mentioned multiple times in the show, where the show will be split up. We're still figuring out the logistics of that. So again, bear with us. We're going to be back with trivia this next week in the first week of January, I believe January 2nd or 3rd. So stay tuned for that one as well. From the Huskies Warming House podcast, we do wish you happy holidays, and we hope you enjoy your New Year's time and get your New Year's resolutions in. I don't know how I feel about Nick going to the gym. I hear that's a very, very common New Year's resolution. We're going to check back in with you, I think, at the end of January, and see if you're actually in the gym, or if you've been taking a snooze on your New Year's resolution. But
right.
But with that, this was a very lengthy episode, but it was our holiday special. So we thank all of our listeners for sticking with us. We are excited to come back with episode number 43, our first episode of 2021. And don't forget, Nick, also another double minor giveaway as well. So more apparel coming your way, more Huskies Warming House content, and of course, the lovely faces of Nick Maxton and Noah Grant that are signing off for 2020.